guys, this is dclaiche, and you might not like me for this one. This is going to be my review of Doctor Who Series 14, Episode 3, Boom! Written by Stephen Moffat, and I was so excited to see Moffat back to write another episode of Doctor Who in the middle of the new Russell T Davies era. Every time Moffat wrote an episode during the first Russell T Davies era, it was always a wondrous occasion, a spectacular thing. He wrote some of the best episodes: The Empty Child, Blink, The Girl in the Fireplace, just absolute bangers. Everyone loved them. And so I was really, really looking forward to seeing what Russell T Davies would cook up with this episode. And it seems that the general reaction that people have been giving, or at least the reaction that I've seen, is people really, really like this episode. They're saying this is Moffat at his best. They're saying that this is the best episode of the entire series so far. And I've come to disagree with all of that. I'm not kidding. I'm actually genuinely befuddled as to why people think that this episode is so spectacular. I would actually say this is Moffat at his worst, or at least close to his worst. I'm sure that there's episodes in his era that I could point to that would potentially be worse than this episode, but this was not one of Stephen Moffat's bangers. But allow me to temper that statement and allow you to potentially distrust my opinion here by pointing out the fact that I didn't understand why Heaven Sent was a banger when it first came out. Now, of course, after looking into that episode a lot more, I agree it is one of the best episodes of Doctor Who that there is. It's not personally my favorite. That honor belongs to The Stolen Earth and Journey's End. But it's still a really, really good episode. So there very well could be a possibility that I'm just wrong and that I'm just missing something. So if you would like to point out what it is that I am missing, then please leave it in the comments below. But this is just my opinion on this episode. So let's just go in first of all with that. This is just my opinion. I also want to temper all that by saying, look, like I said before, Moffat is, in my opinion, the best writer Doctor Who has ever had. I absolutely loved series 5, 6, 7-ish, 8, 9, and 10. I loved the Moffat era of Doctor Who. I love all of the Moffat episodes from the RTD era. So I'm not saying this to bash Moffat. I'm saying this because I'm disappointed in Moffat. Moffat's premises are usually just so big and so fascinating that they hook you immediately. I mean, for goodness sake, you've got the Weeping Angels, you've got the Empty Child, you've got all these fascinating concepts that Moffat is just able to just throw into an episode, and it hooks you. It hooks you really, really good. And he was attempting to do the same thing in this episode. I remember seeing one of the preview videos where it basically said, my whole premise, my big premise for this episode was, I'm going to take away from the Doctor the one thing that he always does. And of course, if you've seen the episode, you know that one thing that the Doctor always does that he is not able to do in this episode is run, because he's standing on a landmine, and if he moves even the smallest iota, he blows up and takes half the planet with him, apparently. This premise is somewhat interesting, but in my personal opinion, isn't big enough to sell an entire episode. At least not by itself. You would have to bring in other fascinating concepts in order to be able to sell it. And there's just not enough fascinating concepts in this episode for me to be able to say that it's up there with all of Moffat's greatest episodes. And for goodness sake, this premise isn't even something that's new to Doctor Who. We've seen the Doctor be immobile for large quantities of episodes before, e.g. the Christmas Invasion, as well as many episodes of Classic Who, particularly episodes of the First Doctor's era, where William Hartnell was feeling sick, so they had to write him out of most of the episode by making him invisible or something like that. So yeah, the premise itself isn't something that's entirely new. It might be new in its scope, because the Doctor, from the beginning of the conflict to the end of the conflict, never actually does move, except for a little bit whenever he's given a corpse in order to level him out. But every other surrounding detail in this story we have seen before. A robot that's intended for medical use that actually ends up killing people. We've seen that before. The Church in the future being an army. We've seen that before, particularly in Moffat-written episodes. An entirely useless war. We've seen that before. An uber-capitalist organization that cares more about making a profit than it does about the safety of its employees. We've seen that before. Twice, actually. Even the visual of the doctor stepping on a landmine and having to keep perfectly still. We've seen that before. So much in this episode that we've seen before. It just, none of it is new. There's no new hook to this episode. For goodness sake, even the pre-credit sequence I thought was just incredibly predictable. As I was watching this, I was already thinking, okay, so we've got the dad character and we've got the not dad character. The dad character and the not dad character are in a sort of dangerous situation. The not dad character is going to die. That's just a foregone conclusion. And the dad character is either going to die or be kidnapped at some point, which of course they went with the first option. I mean, it was just so predictable. We've seen all of these elements before. Also, small personal grievance. Did anyone else think that the child was a tad bit too naive? I mean, for goodness sake, this child can't tell the difference between an AI hologram of her father and the real thing? I mean, I guess I can kind of give her a pass. Maybe this is the first war that she's ever seen. You just think that she'd be able to tell the difference. I don't know, that's a me thing. That's just what I think. I thought that was a little annoying. I do like the interaction between Mundy Flynn and the child. I forget her name. What's her name? I just found this. The blinded soldier is named John Francis Vater. They literally stole the father character being named Vader from Star Wars. Splice. The daughter's name is Splice. I did like the interaction between Mundy Flynn and Splice. I thought that they worked well together. And that's about all I can say about that. I mean, for goodness sake, the only thing in this episode that actually genuinely surprised me was when Kanto died. And even then, my reaction was a fairly underwhelmed, oh no, he's dead. Boo. And then you have the whole discussion of faith versus evidence in this episode, which I think is somewhat interesting. Although as a Christian myself, I don't particularly care for faith being portrayed as belief without evidence, but, you know, that's just me, and that is how a lot of people view faith, even some Christians. They think it's faith without evidence. So at the very least, this is a poignant subject to be talking about. Except faith totally isn't belief without evidence. Come at me, Reddit atheists. This episode was, to use the word that I really didn't want to be using anymore, serviceable. If I had to use one other word to describe this episode, it would be cliche. It is so unbelievably cliche. So many things that we've seen before, and the big hook premise that Moffat intended to carry the whole episode just doesn't do the job. It is by no means Moffat's best work. So, unfortunately, I have to say, I was not a huge fan of Boom. But then again, that's just my opinion. If one of you guys who think that Boom was one of the best episodes that Moffat ever wrote are watching this video, you can tell me in the comments below why I'm wrong and why this is actually a spectacular episode. Because I don't see it, but then again, I have a track record for not being able to see it sometimes. So go ahead and tell me what your opinion of this episode was in the comments down below. Hopefully you guys enjoyed this review. Thank you for watching. Please come back next time for another video for you from me. And this is dclaiche saying goodbye.